Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you have chosen to spend this hour with us, and we're looking forward to a very invigorating and probably intense discussion about what's going on in my hometown of Memphis and in this country as a whole. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Many of us have been appalled watching the news over the past several days and the release of the video of the tragic killing of the person in Memphis, Tennessee, a young 28-year-old Black man. But different than our usual thing when a young Black man, unarmed, gets killed, it's usually by white police. The difference is that this time there were at least five Black police officers who beat this young man to death. And my initial reaction was one of anger. But when you really look at it, it's one of real sadness, because it speaks to the mental state of many people of the Black persuasion in current times. Years ago, I read a letter written by Willie Lynch. And the letter basically said, he can keep slavery going if he can teach Black people to only trust white people, to not trust anything that other Black people say or do, that we can look down on ourselves, meaning Blacks, and consider themselves worthless and basically have self-hate. So that's the reason we chose the title today. And we have a speaker who is a preeminent psychiatrist. Our co-moderator is also a psychiatrist, Dr. Ivan Walks. And we also have invited several other psychiatrists from the National Medical Association to join us, Dr. Ron Bailey and others. So we're going to introduce, if you don't mind, Dr. Walsh, introduce Dr. Lawson. And let's get started. We're going to let people make comments, make suggestions, put your hand up. And one of our co-moderators, Dr. Walks, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, Dr. Hines, or myself will recognize you. Thank you very much for being here. Dr. Walks, would you mind introducing the famous Dr. William Lawson, MD, PhD?
Thank you, Dr. Maxey. I never mind introducing Dr. Lawson. I get to do it frequently. Dr. Lawson is one of those people that's been everywhere and done everything and is still doing it. He is Professor Emeritus, Howard, Texas. He's on the faculty now at George Washington. And I could spend the next 10 or 15 minutes introducing Dr. William Lawson. He is a lecturer, he's a professor, he's a darn good physician taking care of patients. And so he brings to us that perspective of, people talk about the difference between, or the separation of town and gown, the academic folks from the folks who actually work in the field. Dr. Lawson has for many, many, many years done both. Work in the field, treating patients, as well as being a renowned academic and a renowned researcher. So it's always my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lawson. I just want to make one opening comment. It's important for us to recognize that when we are talking about individuals, we should treat them as individuals. And so much of the push of Dr. Lawson's to come and share with us today is about a young man named Tyre Nichols. And Tyre Nichols, and I'm saying his name a few times, Tyre Nichols was treated worse than a child would treat a toy they didn't want anymore. People say you wouldn't treat a dog that way. Well, not in America, absolutely not. You get in more trouble. But Tyre Nichols was treated worse than a child would treat a toy they didn't want anymore. And the devaluing of the life of Tyre Nichols should make us all pause. And it did make Dr. Lawson pause, and he's with us today to lead the discussion. Several other, as Dr. Maxey said, prominent folks in the mental health community have joined us. A psychiatrist, our good friend Ron Bailey, who's been with us many times, is with us again today. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to get us started with the conversation. Dr. Lawson, thank you so much, man, for being with us today.
No sweat. And let me see if I can get this share screen to do what it is supposed to do. And you're now flipping to the beginning of our slides. And I'm very glad to have an opportunity to present this group. You probably guessed I had several opportunities to present to other public groups about this events that's going on. And I just want to note some disclosures. One of them is that I used to be Chief Medical Officer for the state of Tennessee's Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. And it was very disappointing to see this kind of episode happen. Because then we thought we had put into place some programs to improve policing, as well as to reduce the risk for people of color when they encounter police officers. We had an episode then, two contrasting issues. One was people demanding the more rate, but then I worked with a family. We had a young man who had a psychotic episode, and I helped them to reach out to the police department, and they essentially treated like a SWAT team, went in, shot him 5-6 times. Luckily, he survived. And it showed again that we are in a situation where there's a lot of work that needs to be done. That was over a decade ago, and it's sad to see these kinds of issues still happening. And again, want to note that I think most of you may have seen the videotape, Tyre Nichols. To me, I had actually seen the pictures of Emmett Till. So there's a lot of similarities and thoughts, but big differences. The big difference, of course, is that we're dealing with 5 African-American officers, and that it wasn't seen as if it was an unplanned event, but that they systematically went out, surrounded this youth, and took turns beating him. Also using our modern technology, tasers, and other techniques that's supposed to reduce the likelihood of harm, but yet still use fists, tails, whatever, at someone who was not struggling, who was not fighting. And the results were, he expired. And also the response. Not only did they discuss the beating afterwards, but also initially did not let the parents see his body, told them that he had been, had superhuman strength, must have been on drugs, and so forth. Dehumanized him in terms of describing what happened. And again, not long after, before that, we were well aware of George Floyd, of Ahmaud Arbery. Those, it was fairly easy to say, well, racism must be involved and so forth. But here, at least directly, it's difficult to say that. Now, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about various factors that exist, I think, in our society that can contribute to such a thing. And hopefully, lay the foundation for discussing what kind of ways we can do to prevent this from happening. And I'm definitely going to leave enough time for some of our other folks to know, Dr. Bailey and others would, I think, talk extensively about what kinds of ways we can address this. We'll first go back to one point that Dr. Satcher and I might also add Carl Bell has made, and that is that when we look at mental health issues, then we look at public health issues, homicide has got to be brought into it. Homicide has got to be brought into it. I want to make the point that homicide is a public health issue that is an important issue for African Americans. During the pandemic, and I want to bring in the pandemic, there was a substantial increase in terms of murder and manslaughter in the United States. And it was disproportionately affecting African Americans. And that is that we made up 55% of the homicide victims, 6% of the increase relative to the year before. So the homicide rate for African Americans went from 22.9% 100,000 to 30.7% 100,000. So in many ways, it was as much of a public health issue as much as the pandemic. And this again shows that African Americans were much more likely to be killed in what can look at as a murder wave right after the pandemic. And this wasn't just in terms of people killing other people. Also, we also recognize that the suicide rate is substantially increased in the African American community. So these two concerns that usually we do not talk about in terms of public health, but I think we need to say more about is that homicide rate, suicide rate in our communities. And to add to that, we need to look at many of these times it's involved young men. Number one cause of death many times throughout our history for young African American men is usually a person known to the victim. In the past, most of these crimes has been spur of the moment, not a result of premeditation. The drug trade was important, so was poverty. And then there's this relationship between homicide and suicide. Now, how can you deal with it? What is one solution? Well, it would suggest that perhaps better policing might be the solution to what we can do about this. And what we find, however, we're going to take the fox to guard the chicken house. What we find is that Black men killed in the US every 28 hours, and Black women and girls are also killed disproportionately by law enforcement agencies. So we have a problem in that we have people that are being victimized by homicide, but one of the obvious solutions, that is to improve policing, the crime, law enforcement, and so forth, the enforcers are disproportionately more likely to be participating in the act themselves. And the question then becomes, why is this happening? How is this happening? And what is the answer to people of color who need to have this issue dealt with in their communities? How can they feel safe? Who do they turn to address this kind of concern? And I like to go back to history, and history doesn't always tell you what to do going forward, but there are certain points of our history that we need to look at, and that is that people of color were in fact enslaved. After enslaved, it was the black codes, the civil rights era, which was the use of non-violent ways of trying to deal with this issue. But today, we continue to have a major problem in our communities that is addressing these concerns in a negative way. And one of these is, again, let's go back to slavery. Our policing in our country is frankly quite different from many other countries. I've looked at the Japanese police system, for instance, where the police are respected, get to know the community and to know that you can have information about the neighborhood and to become ingrained within the neighborhood. And whereas in the US, the police are very much separated, if not physically, and at least in terms of demographically and other reasons, from their from their communities. Part of it, again, has to do with some of the origins of policemen. And that is that historically, police did play a major role in terms of helping to maintain the slavery system. That is, they monitored Black people, deployed unfortunate tactics that we're now seeing. Contrary to popular belief, there was a strong concern throughout much of the South about slave uprisings. And if so, they thought they had to have not only the men of the slave owners well armed, but they had to have people there to make sure that the slaves themselves, not only did they did not lead some sort of revolt. And then they had slave patrols. They had the ability to confront formerly enslaved Black people. In addition, at the time of slavery, slaves had to have passes. They were monitored. They had to have proof as to why they were walking around and not have papers that show going from one plantation to another. They were subject at any time to stop and frisk. Even if a person was not an enslaved person, they still were subject to stop and frisk. And there was a general belief, up until fairly recently, that African Americans in the South were walking around without being part of a plantation or otherwise, indentured servants or others, had to have some evidence of what they were about. And then there was, of course, the persisting belief that Black people are more violent, that if folks weren't working, that they may be getting into mischief, they may be impulsive and do dangerous things. And what we also need to look at is that these kinds of beliefs are extremely resistant to change. There was the Black Lives Matter race-led racial justice movement that after George Floyd, but it showed that the number of Black people killed was actually increased over the last years. And we want us to all remember that while there was the big push, Black Lives Matter, there was at least a stronger push for quotes dealing with crime in the cities, to have more policing to protect people. And also, again, the likelihood after George Floyd was that Black people were twice as likely to be shot and killed as white people. Then one of the arguments has been recently is that folks should not focus on things like critical race theory, because the rationale it's given is that it creates the idea of Black folks as being victimized, which is now considered unacceptable for certain political parties. But the core of critical race theory is that, of course, race is not a construct, but also that racism is not an individual bias. So while we're looking at certain officers doing bad things, we need to look at the whole system as being part of an overall system that's embedded in the legal system, not just the legal system, but also the political system, as well as the economic system. And driving this is a certain narrative that those of us in mental health are well aware of, and that is historically African Americans are perceived of not only as having limited mental life, but also as being more impulsive than the general population, more violent than the general population. So the idea is that the average African American in Channel One is just much more likely to do something dangerous. And this has actually had an impact in terms of understanding mental health. And for a long time, we thought that people with severe mental illness were dangerous. Then you constantly hear the narrative now that the problem in our community is that we have a broken mental health system, that if we can do something about mental health, that the issue of violence will go away. And that led to the whole colleague Jonathan Metzl, the protest psychosis, and that schizophrenia and other severe mental illness were Black diseases. But overall in society, there is the underlying assumption that there are these undiagnosed, mentally ill, many African-American people running around who are carrying out terrible crimes, who are involved in massacres and so forth, when in fact there's just no evidence whatsoever to support it. The other part that I think we can borrow from what we know in terms of mental health, of course, is the famous Milgram Shark experiment. Just to remember those who don't remember that, this was a very interesting study in which a person was put in a setting in which they're supposed to shock somebody if they were given some questions and answered them wrong. And what they found is that many people who were not criminals or who had not been had any evidence of being violent would in fact obediently shock the subjects, even when the subjects were screaming and yelling. So it shows that under some social circumstances, individuals will do acts that are close to harming other individuals, especially if they are put in situations when they don't know the person or can't see them. And this has been done in other settings, in people who were asked to act as prison guards, other college students. They quickly degenerated into actually abusive behavior by these people when they were working with. So again, there's this logical literature that strongly shows that people in certain social situations will, even though they may not have had previous criminal activity, can be involved in terms of abusive behavior. And then if you add someone who's armed, I think that adds another barrier. And then the idea has always been that if we can get more Black people more in the police force, if we can get more African Americans in terms of leadership positions, that a lot of these problems can be resolved. But we again have to go back to not only that the impact had in terms of affecting the racial attitudes of white people, but it also has some persistent factors in terms of African Americans as well. One of what many people tend to forget is that Supreme Court 1954 school integration decision was heavily influenced by Kenneth Clark and Mamie Clark's Dow study. And what that study showed several points, but one of them is that when the students were presented, Black students were presented with the Black Dow, many of them became very uncomfortable, and many of them would not choose the Dow that looked like them. This has been replicated multiple times, it's varied across the years, but the point is that many African American people have been indoctrinated to the idea that people of color are somehow either inferior or may not be as worthy as other individuals. We can call it self-hate and so forth, but what it means practically is that many African Americans, especially if they're in positions in which they are relatively powerless, may, just as we discussed in the Milgram Shark experiment, follow orders. Then also, it's important to recognize that these kinds of beliefs and feelings are established very, very early. And not only established early, but throughout our system. Several colleagues of mine have done multiple studies showing that if you look in the school system, African-American youth are much more likely to be subject to corporal punishment or to be dismissed from school. It's been replicated multiple times, and it's actually seen to happen frequently even if the teachers themselves are African American. So we have multiple factors, I think, that come together that's influencing the impact of what's going on in terms of explaining these conditions and also what does not work. What are some of the answers? There's Sean Ray, who said that if you pay more attention to police brutality, it'll be less of it. And what we're seeing is that, especially after we had demonstrations, and I remember some back in the, when I was in Tennessee back in the 80s, we had multiple demonstrations. In the aftermath, what you find is that the police departments hunker down, go behind what he calls the blue wall of silence. They become defensive to themselves. I was just listening to the radio a few minutes ago before the show, in which we were listening to an officer who was a leadership position made it clear that the answer is not to have police monitoring or evaluation put under some other system. So only police can monitor police. So these kinds of beliefs make it very difficult to make significant change. The other one was we could put Black people in leadership positions, national, state, and local government, that these problems will go away. And in fact, what we find is that, yeah, it might help, but sometimes it doesn't. And it has to take into the context that in many institutions and in many departments, the police department is relatively insulated politically from other components of the system. And of course, we noted that the police forces different, demographically different from the people that they serve. Not just that the police may be white, but also have better income levels, and also or actually in some communities are often physically separated, even though there are residency laws. Many times they find ways to get around them, having an apartment in town that they never stay in, and so forth. And in fact, studies have shown that residency requirements simply don't work, even though it may affect some other things, but it doesn't affect positive effect on the quality of the policing. And then there's a very interesting study. This is from 220 to 221. Gallup poll showed that Black people's trust of the police actually has risen, but it rose from 19% to 27%. So there's still a healthy distrust, I think, in some ways, of African Americans in terms of the police department. Then what about Black Lives Matter? Well, I heard a number of lawmakers, politicians say, we're going to get to the root of this. We'll just cut police funding, take the money and put it into social services. Didn't happen, or if they did, it was restored or diverted in terms of other ways. So what I've done is I've laid out the issues, what kind of solutions do we have. I've been involved with, and I might add one other thing is have sensitivity training to the police, which is a number of different programs online as well as face-to-face that we have now. And what I've consistently found is that these programs essentially become very, very regimented and not very meaningful to the participants. Is often the case, they simply disappear. Getting recurrence of these programs, having police officers to participate in them repeatedly has been extremely difficult. So I'm going to end now to listen to how our experts discuss this issue. I think we have an important challenge, and I think that having a public health perspective maybe provide different eyes to look at these kinds of issues.
Dr. Lawson, thank you so much for this very erudite look at the problem. And I know you've sparked a lot of questions that we expect to deal with. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, Dr. Hind, and Dr. Walks. Dr. Walks, why don't you start us off?
Let me ask Dr. Maxey if we can unmute Dr. Ron Bailey. I'd love to hear some comments from him. He's done, not only is he one of our country's prominent psychiatrists and prominent educator in mental health, but has also done a lot of research focused on violence and different kinds of violence. So if we can, go ahead, Dr. Bailey. Thank you so much for being with us.
We know he's the first Black chairman of a department at LSU. He's chairman of psychiatry. Am I correct, Dr.?
That's correct. And happy to join the group today. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Ivan, Dr. Max, and all. I've had enjoyed being on your group in the past. I find it very, very excellent. One could start by saying that Bill Lawson hit, as he always does, so many, I think, of the most signature points that you may feel earlier today. That was absolutely outstanding. I thought in every way, Bill Lawson, and it's hard to really add much, I think, value. I was really very, very impressed. I was happy with Maxie that you were going to be on and thankful for the presentation. That being said, I will try to identify a few points that my team pulled to try to add some value. And really the four themes are going to be very briefly, and then we can maybe have some discussion. Issues of humanity, issues of identification, issues of military or militaristic engagement, and issues of Bill Lawson called it being embedded in PRT. All points that I think elaborate on. One issue of humanity. I, like Bill, was watching television today. Everybody's discussing the fact that these engagements by law enforcement, be they all white of any background, do acknowledge, I think, the prevailing theme that unfortunately we all, I think, are increasingly aware of. Too many individuals in our world don't view us as being humane when we're Black or Black and brown. Worse so if you have the triple demographic of being Black or brown and young and male. And that's why I think we don't tend to see these engagements with 50-year-old white women. And when you say it, people get excited. I was at a board meeting once with the APA, and like I said it parenthetically, folks looked at me like I had horns on. But I'm a human being. I'm not so sure why it can't happen to a 50 or 60-year-old white woman at times, and a rich white woman at that point, always to people who others view as less than humane. Love to hear some comments from your audience about that as we go forward. I would also add that I think that I've also understood that police departments are trained to do that. This is not arbitrary. So you go through training and you identify certain neighborhoods, you identify who's likely to be abusive, you identify who's called by names that are not based on humanity. You know, those people are, trash or rats or things of that nature. All of that, I think, subsumes an underpinning of a misunderstanding that all individuals, in this case, was a human. Next, this issue, I think, about being identification, just being identified as different. I think probably everybody on this call would probably qualify as being, middle class and educated, perhaps African American. And how often do all of us go through the experience? And I've gone through it 1,000 times in my life. When someone initially engages with me, whether it's a policeman, whether it's a teacher in school, whether it's in a mall or any kind of authority figure, they want to know, they want to talk first. If I speak eruditely, as Randall said, that's better. They want to know, where do I work? They want to know, what kind of work do I do? They want to know, where do I live? The different neighborhoods carry a price tag, which house looks like. And I'm treated very differently, no matter what I did before that may have theoretically been some other heading of aberrant behavior or driving too fast or breaking the rules. That, I think, is a problem. Even on CNN, a day or two ago, I heard one of the anchors make the argument in the midst of a long conversation with other experts on television that, well, Tyree was a good kid and he had good grades and he went to church or Sunday, whatever. None of that should actually matter when the police stop you for a traffic stop. And this has happened over and over again. And I think from a solution perspective, I like Bill's point about solutions, we've got to make the argument Black professionals. Not only do we wait until after it happens and argue this was a really bad one, we should stop many of those pro-homo activities that I think also lead up to this problem of having to identify as being middle class or worthy before someone decides whether they're going to sanction you or whatever the behavior, driving reckless, whatever that's been. The third issue has been military. I have a son in the military now, so I'm learning a lot about military type issues. And the reality is these militaristic or so-called paramilitary arms of police departments just don't work for us. If they ever were geared to work, they were theoretically geared to be to identify a military event on American soil. So if the bad guys robbing a bank had AK-47s, each police department had to have some person show up with equally powerful weaponry. I've been doing forensics for 30 years, and all too often my experience has been that the powerful weaponry is not used when there's a SWAT team issue in a setting where I think somebody's robbing a bank, but in a regular setting, often with an underarmed or not at all armed African American person. And I think what we have to appreciate is that too many individuals, black and white, when they're dressed blue, view black skin on young males as being a prodromal factor of a military orientation. So they see you as engaged with them as if you're in a military setting in Afghanistan, some case like that. I find it objectionable. And I think this particular issue with the young man who was in a middle class neighborhood, if you will, when this happened, so I think brings that piece out. I'd also argue the military is also particularly problematic because our federal government, in my opinion, plays a role, Dr. Maxey. When we started selling older military equipment to local law enforcement under the auspices that then fight the bad guys, we had to know, or should have recognized at some point soon, that they were disproportionately being used in black and brown communities to over-militarize the typical police response, often for events like this. But this gets our attention because there's very clearly a substantive drama action. He was not running from having murdered somebody. They hadn't gotten a call that he'd done they weren't looking for him. They stopped him inadvertently, theoretically for an inconsequential traffic violation, one that really can't even really be proven, and then use this heavy, what I call over-militarized type response. But how often does this happen in schools, where the police person in school fights the young black girl who gets into a 15, 14-year-old fight the way people had all the time when I was growing up, and they're fighting or pushing or pulling hair, and the military response very often, or the over response, is to fight them, to body slam them, to arrest them. So we're seeing this across a full spectrum, I think, Dr. of American activity. Again, I find it objectionable and issues that I like doctors like ourselves have to speak very aggressively toward and against. And my final point, again, I think Bill also did an excellent job. And the last point about how the entire system is at fault is a point for us to make, whether we're in the National Medical Association, the COB, or you've been down at LSU, but a lot of work in this space, I think, in New in general, because we have a huge problem in the same regard with over-militarization of police. And I think what we're seeing there is an over violent response or over-arming one's response by those in the local society, and all because I think everybody's kind of ramping up the energy toward violence. So this issue about an embedded problem in our entire system, I think, is consequential. But I think we should think about very, very directly, because if every unit of American society, above the police, the judicial system, the jail system, the legal system, the educational system, even very often the nonprofit system, ups their ante, increases their security, heightens, I think, the potential to have a over-violent response. You're seeing that, I think, in the duplicate across the spectrum. And what we see, I think, overall is a very, very increasingly violent American society, and one that none of us think we can, I think, live safely in. I'll stop with that. Thanks for having me, Dr. Maxey. Appreciate the comments, Ivan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Always a great contribution, and we're always happy when you are with us. Dr. Maxey, if I can go to one other person, and then I want to come back to our members. Tony Wofford has been with us many, many times, and really brings a perspective from the community as he shares with us. Is it possible to get Tony Wofford unmuted, Simon?
Tell Tony he still owes me lunch. Mr. Wofford?
He's still on mute. So let me go to Dr. Neighbor Stevens and Dr. Hines. Dr. Maxey, also, I know Dr. Villanueva has shared with us in the past, and Dr. Johnson is a regular attendee that always brings something. So if we can begin to unmute Dr. Villanueva, Dr. Johnson, Tony Wofford, and we can get some comments for whoever can get their microphone unmuted first. Dr. Maxey.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Villanueva, please. You're unmuted.
I know, sorry. Okay, sorry. So, yeah, sorry. I didn't really expect to be off, to be on camera. I'm actually at my,
Let me give Dr. Villanueva her proper. She is
I'm actually at my dad's house right now, but,
the past president of the National Medical Association.
yes, following in the illustrious footsteps of Dr. Maxey. I think obviously this is not my wheelhouse of expertise. But I do think organizationally, Black Health Trust and NMA really need to come out and make take a forceful stand when it comes to issues of violence and brutality in our community against our patients and our community. Because I do think, although some people like to say that this isn't a medical issue, this certainly is a medical issue and is part of how we take care of our patients. I know that you had Dr. Roger Mitchell on not too long ago, and we are part of his violence prevention task force of NMA that was actually a task force before, but has now become a council, a standing council in our organization. And I know that this will be sort of working with other organizations and working to make sure NMA is at the forefront of this issue is part of our goal for this year. And I know that we'll be working with other organizations like Noble and the 100 Black Men and just trying to, I think, become a stronger, collaboratively becoming stronger as part of organizations that lead that are leaders in this area. And I think I don't know how many more times we have to see the same things over and over again in our community. But hopefully NMA will be taking a more intentional step in being in leading in this area. Sorry, my thoughts are all over the place. I just, I was thinking of just thinking of what Dr. Bailey was saying about, them saying that he was a good kid and that he got good grades and how that really does not make a difference. And I think that I think that if any of us is stopped, we're all in the same boat because we don't, our credentials aren't at the forefront. And so I think, that's just something that I always keep in mind for my own, nephews and, children of my friends that, when Black men are stopped or Black women are stopped for that matter, I think just Black people, there really is a target out on us. And I think we need to be able to start making better strides in not allowing this to continue in our community. And I think that NMA working with Black Health Trust will be, it's very important for us to be working together.
Thank you, Dr. Villanueva. Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson.
Well, I will just say that I chose not to watch any of the videos this week. I was very intentional. Every time it came on, it was played over and over and over again. So I had to be very proactive in not watching. So I did not watch the beating. I've tried to avoid mostly all the news coverage. I have found that this particular incident really has me, I just don't know how to feel about this one. This one has really gotten to me. And, there's so many of them. And I find myself reacting to these incidents as a mother more than anything else. I'm a mother of a 26-year-old African-American male. So I really react to these with very strong emotion. And, the fact that these were 5 Black police officers, just that adds a whole nother element that I just cannot fathom. And I haven't been able to wrap my feelings around this, to even talk about it. That's all I can tell you. I'm watching, but I'm still in shock. I think this one still in deep shock and hurt and pain over this incident.
It is tough, Dr. Johnson. Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Jordan with his hand up.
Yes, Dr. Jordan has his hand up. And Simon, while Dr. Jordan is getting unmuted, can we also unmute Dr. Christina Walks Harper, who is a senior level educator in one of our primarily Black and brown school systems.
What was her
And,
middle name? What was that middle name?
The first name is the important part. That's Dr. PhD Dr. Christina Walks Harper, who has presented here on the Black Health Trust before. Dr. Jordan.
Yes, this is called self-hate, and we've grown through this. And we, as professionals, have continued to ignore it. We allow rap singers and comedians to use the N-word all the time. I have never heard of any Jewish professional referring to any Jewish kite. Italians don't call themselves wetbacks. We're the only group that is silent when the things that come up is put in our community. And it makes kids feel like they are not as equal to others. We have to deal with that as well. And I think the NMA, I hope this year, will speak out against the use of comedians and others using the N-word so much. Nothing is gained by me making me think of you as a nigger. But when I think of you as a nigger, then I make you less than human. And we're doing this to ourselves too, and we can't ignore that part. This goes back to the 50s. If you're from the South, there were many policemen. They trained them then to be rough on Blacks, and they were Black policemen. And again, it goes back to the self-hate part. So I think this is something the NMA needs to deal with. If we're really going to do something, we need to take this on. But we need to be the ones saying, stop using the N-words and let's start doing other things.
I think your point is well taken. Dr. Walks, let me ask a question. I was watching TV this morning and I heard the governor of New Hampshire, Governor Sununu, I think his name is. And I also watched Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. And I also had a private equity potential investor. And they denigrate, they said, we hate this woke culture. Now, I may not be an excellent linguist, but if somebody's woke or awake and is observing what is unfairly being put on them, is that supposed to be bad? Is the word woke to know what's going on with you, to know what's going on with your group? Is that bad?
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead, Dr. Neighbor-Steven.
Given the two, yeah, because I can see you I see where you're heading.
You see me getting worked up?
Yeah, I do. Let me just say that they spoke the truth when they said it is bad to be woke. And the reason it is bad to them for you to be woke is because a woke opponent is a much more dangerous opponent than an opponent that is asleep. So I call it a Freudian slip, or maybe it's deliberate on their part, but I think it is highly revealing that they are open in saying what they're saying. We need to not ignore what they're saying. The reason that he being DeSantis, is so adamant about clamping down on anything around African-American history and racial awareness is he knows if these kids find out the truth, he's not going to be able to push through a lot of the things that he has been able to do in the past. An ignorant constituency is much easier to manage than one that is informed. So I find it really shocking that they are willing. I think it goes to the point that they think that we are so irrelevant that they can even broadcast openly what their thoughts and agenda really is.
So let me bring up one more point.
Very well said.
I know that one of our speakers, whether it was Dr. Lawson or Bailey, identified that most of us are middle-class people, educated people, and we believe in working things the so-called right way. At some point, I know in the past, many of us thought the Black Panthers were radicals, and you may think that Black Lives organization is radical. What level of activity do we have to do besides walking up and down the street and carrying signs, besides having meetings? What can we really do to address this tragedy that's killing our people, denigrating the visions of our children of what they can do? What can we really do to get rid of just the moniker being middle class and educated? Do you get what I'm saying? What can we do? What should we do?
So let's get to some of the solutions going forward, Dr. Maxey, because I'm as happy as anybody else to celebrate the problem, but because the problem is killing us, and we talk about other health issues that are killing us, like diabetes, kidney disease, et cetera. I think we should look at how we work in all the places where our people are. And that's why I wanted Dr. Walks Harper to make a couple of comments as a senior level educator within a school system. If you could share a couple of your thoughts, Dr. Walks Harper, on just how these kinds of incidents, these kinds of events impact our community and impact your ability as a leader to keep doing what you need to do, which is educate our kids.
Thank you, Dr. Walks, and good afternoon, everyone. I apologize, I missed the cue earlier. I can say that timing is everything. I was dealing with a situation that we just had in our district. We lost 2 African-American males last night to gun violence, 2 of our high school students, and to shooting at a party that they attended. And I can say that I believe that the supposed devaluation of Black life in this country is part of what exacerbates the violence within the Black community. When the leadership doesn't acknowledge well the value of African Americans, I believe it bleeds into the communities where we oftentimes see the results of Black on Black crime, Black on Black violence, because there is an overarching inappropriate and inexcusable view that somehow our lives are less than. So just coming off of this incident and working with our teams today on a Sunday morning, began early this morning, working on addressing the issue and the mental health crisis in our schools and getting our teams out to the site so that tomorrow morning when school begins, we're ready to address the social and emotional health of our students, which does come before the academic nurturing of students. So this is tangible. This is it's real life. It's everyday experiences and helping our students to understand who they are and to value themselves. And when we see things like the opposition to critical race theory education for our young people, we're on an ethnic studies committee now, making sure that we make that a graduation requirement, and that's coming up in the next couple of years. So that will be a graduation requirement in our district. But these are all the sort of the ancillary impacts of the devaluation or attempted devaluation of Black life in our community. So that's where we are currently.
Thank you,
Dr. Walks Harper. So sorry to hear about another 2 lives lost.
Yeah.
Dr. Hines, let me get your comments while we're unmuting Dr. Sherrod, please. Dr. Hines?
I am kind of with Dr. Johnson. This one hits different and hurts in a wholly kind of different way. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it through this conversation. So I'm glad that we're having a lot of commenters, because it's hard for me to just not cry. Because there's no safety anywhere. Like,
Yeah.
anywhere. Not at school, not at the movies, not for your little kids, not for your adult kid. Like, it's a lot. Like, that is, it's not Black police, it's not white police.
It's a lot. It's a lot, Dr. Hines. It's a lot. Dr. Sherrod?
Good morning. I just want to commend all of the speakers today and all of I agree with pretty much what has been said, but I want to emphasize that we have to remember who we are and where we came from. And I think that we're now in the age of integration, which has created a false sense of security for us as a population. Integration destroyed our Black communities, our Black schools where we had Black principals, Black teachers. And I'm not saying that it was totally, but a total loss, but it has disrupted the Black infrastructure that educated our kids and our adults about our value. I think Dr. Jordan's point about self-hate is something that needs to be addressed in an educational way in the school system or in our churches or even at organizations like the NMA and all the other civic organizations that we have. I think we have to take responsibility for educating ourselves and our kids about this system of racism, which Dr. Lawson defined. It is a system, an artificial construct that has been created for the advantage of certain people. And actually, they've brainwashed us into the believing in this system so that we act automatically without even thinking. The system is so refined at changing these Black cops who you would think would remember where they came from first, but they are in the system and they have been brainwashed too. So that is a major problem. I think we got to start educating the best way we can, our kids and ourselves, and be conscious. Even when we have elected officials who are Black, we still don't achieve what we need to achieve because they are in fear of losing their jobs if they do anything for another Black person. Where every other culture group in this country, when they get in office, they do things for their culture. But for somehow, we as the native Black Americans cannot function in that manner. And if we do, of course, you're gonna get some flack, like the Black Panthers. So I just, it's frustrating and it's very, it's depressing, it's painful, it's traumatic to even see all of the stuff that went on. And these are 5 Black young men. They came out of the integration period. You know what I mean? We've had about 40 years of that now, more, but more than 40 years, I guess it's been since the 1960s. But I just want to encourage us to use our organizations, our churches, and at home. It starts at home, but the parents have to know in order to educate the kids. So we may have to go into the homes or get them at church or wherever you can get them and talk about how our history and how we've contributed so much to building this society and the value of life. I mean, I was in Stockholm, Sweden back in the 80s at an AIDS conference, and these little Swedish kids were in the subway station breakdancing because Michael Jackson had just been over there. And I said, I wish the youth from America could see how they're being imitated all over the world, but in America, they feel like nothing because they're told they're nothing.
So let me
thank you for the time. Yes.
Let me
Go ahead,
ask
Dr. Maxey.
the question I have, and there's an organization called the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. you can't say one bad word or bad thing about our Jewish communities. The ADL is all over you. I believe we need something that aggressive within our community. Not that the NAACP is not a good organization or all the other organizations, but we don't have any aggression. We seem to be passive. I don't see our Black elected officials in Congress saying much of anything. You know, I think we need to up the ante and be more aggressive with our own education. I think what the things that Dr. Jordan said are very important. I think what we let our rappers and entertainers get away with, we have to be aggressive and take care of our own people correctly. I think it's so heinous that a Black man would kill another Black man. That means we're totally psychotic, in my opinion.
Unconscious.
So Dr. Maxey, I have been successful in not going off for the whole hour that we had. It is now after 5. And I think as we prepare to come to the end of what we're doing today, a couple of comments I want to make. I know you asked me to make comments
Yes.
about 30 minutes ago, but let me make a couple of comments. I think we have to listen. Words matter. I think that when we talk about elected officials, we had a Black president for 8 years in this country, and he did a lot. And the Black First Lady did a lot. And still, we allow things to go by when we hear them. We allow people to say things like, nobody wanted to kill Tyre Nichols. What the police think about is they just want to get home. They just want to get home. You know what? If I want to get home and I feel like I have to run through a whole bunch of dangerous Black people to get home, I might start pushing them out of the way. I might start not treating them well. So we cannot allow people to say things like, we just want to get home. It wasn't intentional, because at the root of it is how we are viewed. This whole exception to the rule thing that our dear friend Ron Bailey brought up, well, once I know that you're Dr. Bailey, or you're Dr. Jordan, or you're Dr. Lawson, I'm going to treat you a certain way. People do that. Somebody had the nerve a few days ago to tell myself and a couple of Black friends of mine, I was just listening to y'all in the next booth. Y'all are so articulate. I thought to myself, people still say that to us? Yes, they do still say that to us. So I think we have to listen to how people talk about us, and we have to remember to hold our cool. There's an old song, Dr. Maxey, you're too young to remember this song, where one of the lines is, seems like I gotta do wrong before they notice me. So many folks in our community feel like they are not noticed, that we are not noticed, except when somebody thinks we're doing wrong. And folks are trained to think we're doing wrong. It is a very dangerous place for us, as Dr. Johnson and Dr. Hines, parents of Black men and Black boys. It's dangerous for us. And I will just say to you, nothing about what happened to Tyre Nichols surprised me. I've never been arrested, but I've been taken out of my car and handcuffed and sat on a sidewalk in my suit after I was Dr. Walks. So going to school is not going to make everything better. I got an apology from the police department. When did I get it, Dr. Bailey? When they found out I was Dr. Walks. That right? I mean, come on. This is where we live. And I think we have to continue to say Ahmaud Arbery and Tyre Nichols and even Rodney King and all of the names, and keep in the forefront that what Richard Pryor said decades ago, I'm reaching into my pocket for my license because I don't want to be no accident. We have to teach our children still today that maybe you can get home safely if you do those things. But if the police are pepper spraying you in the face and you're not trying to defend yourself from that, something's wrong with you. It hurts. It hurts. So when you are hurting us and expecting us not to fight back, it's actually inhuman and unreasonable. The last thing I'll say is this. I saw one of those officers kick Tyree Nichols so hard that the officer limped away. He hurt his foot kicking that young man. Come on. We have got to be outraged. I don't think all of us have to look at the video because it's very hard to watch, but I think we all have to know that there's something about we're just all trying to get home that doesn't wash for us, that we need to know that you're one of the good ones that doesn't wash for us, and that we have to do whatever we can to treat all of us like we have. Y'all remember, y'all old people remember in Roots where they held the baby up and said, behold, the only thing greater than yourself? Dr. Walks Harper, what you all do with our young people in school, so important that they know that we value them enough to care how they're going to feel when they come to school tomorrow, that we're going to educate them so they have an opportunity to be all that they can be. It is critical that we not depend on the next elected Black president or the next elected Black official. I know they're working hard. I know those people in positions are working hard. I know they're trying. We have to help them. NMA, all the sororities, all the fraternities, we have to help them and work with them. And here on Black Health Trust, I think that we are committed to working with anyone who wants to work with us. We are going to talk about this. Folks like Dr. Lawson, Dr. Bailey, and other folks who are doing research so that the science backs up what we're doing. God bless you. Continue to do your work. If we can unmute Dr. Bailey for final comment and Dr. Lawson, and we can try to wrap it up, Dr. Maxey.
Your
Yes.
sister has her hand up, Dr. Walks.
Oh, she's my sister? Dr. Walks Harper, the one that tells me that a PhD is more important than an MD? That one?
I'm
Dr.
not.
Bailey, go ahead, sir.
I'm not that one.
She's got the magic name Walks in her name.
Dr. Bailey, please, sir.
And I'll be brief. I know time is tight. I may have shared before, but I want to share again. I was surprised by how much of an outpour of an antagonism there is towards this issue of CRT. So I put in the chat that I think that CRT has become almost a microcosm of this entire issue as you combat systemic racism. I wrote a paper, I mean, sent it to you, Lawson, and essentially got to continuously accept it, talking about police brutality and violence, what have you. But they want to take this one piece out where I talked about CRT, because it really goes back 100 years, this idea of CT, critical theory, which talked about the imbalance of power in American society. Of late, the issue much more about race, but it's always been about power. I think that really is a huge theme here, and that's why it doesn't necessarily matter whether the police are black or white. When positions of people, positions of power, whether they're in police or school or judiciary or legal or whatever, they use that power disproportionately to mistreat black people. That's, I think, the problem, and that's what I think we got to speak against, and that's what's got to stop.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
Dr. Walks Harper, are you able to unmute? Still on mute. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Quickly, I just wanted to share and to echo Dr. Hines. I had a conversation with one of my sons yesterday, checked in with the other one today, and to hear them say, well, things aren't going to change in our generation, Mom. We are where we are, and they are in their late 30s. And to hear that as a mother just breaks my heart about all the ways that they have to be careful, because we've trained them. Do your best to survive the incident. We can take anybody to court, but we can't get you back. And now I have two grandsons, ages 3 and 1, and we're going to have the conversation for the third generation. And it just breaks my heart to be in that frame of mind of thinking that my babies still aren't safe, and just to leave it there.
no matter what they do, both of them are college graduates, and one of them went to that little school called Harvard University. Even that doesn't make them safe.
Is
It's-
Mr. Walford still on, Dr. Walks?
I don't see Mr. Wofford, Dr. Maxey. Can we go around and get final comments? Because I need to go and sit and cry a little bit. This is tough.
Before we do, can you recognize Dr. Bean, who's a pediatrician?
Yes.
Dr. Bean, are you able to unmute?
Thank you very much. And I have been listening. I've done my crying. And one of the things that are things which we are really going to have to address the issue of, a lot of this starts in terms of self-hate, in terms of reinforcing that if you're a pediatrician, or anyone's a pediatrician and one who serves a population, which is primarily, for example, I'll use Black and brown, the difference with which so many of our Black mothers treat our children, both male and female, and the way that they treat them, and it is a generational thing. It's not my generation, it's not my mother's generation, but it is a generational thing, tends to reinforce these issues from a very, very early age. How much the difference is very, very striking if you watch, and I suggest you watch, just when you're walking down the street, especially you folks in LA, but now the demographics have changed so drastically. Watch the difference between how many of our Black mothers treat our children and our Black fathers treat our children, and how Hispanics treat their children, okay? And that issue of respect is a problem. They do not treat those children with respect from the beginning. And what I see building up in those children, African-American children especially, is this issue of anger, lack of self-respect and of anger. And what you saw in that, beating, and I did watch it, what you saw, and I did have to start turning the channel, what you saw in there was anger. Anger. We have so much anger among our children, which translates into adults who are angry. And we are really going to have to begin to address the issue of how do we address from the beginning. And I was so happy that we do have someone who works as an educator, because I really think that's a critical issue. We have the Black church used to be one of the major ways that we address that. And being old enough to have been through, as was pointed out, what was the impact of integration? The way with the respect that we generated when we had Black institutions is very different now. And that somehow or another, we need to begin to go back to address some of those issues in terms of developing the kind of respect for Black institutions, that for Black people, that are not based upon wealth, position, but just on basic humanity, which we seem to be beginning to lose at this point. Thank you, Dr. Jordan, and so many of the other people. In terms of how we address these issues. So thank you all. And this is an issue which, as you pointed out, is getting old, folks. And you can expect, did you listen to the commentators? And I'm gonna finish. They wanted us to go out there and start writing. They expected us to go out there and start writing. That has become the accepted response. Black folks go out and march around with some flags, with some signs and stuff. Did you hear them? They did. That was their answer to, this is the response that should occur. Not an answer which talked about what we can do to make a difference. And they were disappointed at the fact that there was so little rioting and so little burning. And that to them implies that we have decided that we're no longer willing to fight, because that's how they define the answer to the questions. Anyway,
Thank you so much, Dr. Bean. Thank you. Dr. Lawson, can you give us some comments?
Sure, some quick points. One is that I didn't know that segregation was over, but maybe I missed something. I rarely see white people these days up on TV. But in any point, we do have some institutions. We need to empower them. We're working with a coalition of 40 African-American churches to be able to try to address some of these issues. So we got, the institutions are there. They just had to be empowered, and they just had to give a mechanism by which they can work together. We need to, we have outlets in terms of social media and Black radio. You listen to it sometime and you understand why we are where we are. Just listen to the folks, listen to our commentators. It is talking about us and what is important. Go to the NAACP Image Awards. You hear all about how wonderful we are as entertainers and athletes, but not as scientists, mathematicians, social workers, and so forth. We are the enemy, it is us. Listen to our politicians. Look, listen to the fact that we have now a Black governor in Maryland, but listen to how this is going to spend this money. And look in there and see if you can find anything that has to do with our homicide rate and some of the other issues that we're trying to deal with. So again, we got the tools. Let's use the tools and let's use us to be able to move these folks that supposedly represent us to be able to address some of these concerns.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawson. Really appreciate that.
Dr. Hines, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, any closing comments?
Well, clearly we're in pain over this episode, and we will have to go through the appropriate grieving process over what has happened. But I hope that after the pain subsides, there is new energy targeting specific actions that can help bring change. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, and we really have not had an opportunity to talk about specific actions that can lead to change. But we need to have that conversation. You know, Black people are, it is said, are very emotional. And so, yeah, we're torn up right now, but there is a time, and it's really now, that we need to get ourselves mobilized and in gear and moving on some there. And I actually do, if it sounds like I have something, an agenda, I do. And hopefully we will have an opportunity to revisit this subject.
Thank you, Ms. Dr. Hines.
It was a robust discussion. I don't have anything to add other than to say that controlling your consumption is a way of self-love and taking care of yourself as well, right? And knowing, like, I know me, right? I know what I need to see and not need to see. But I will also say, as somebody put in the chat, you know what hasn't changed? God has not changed. And the space of safety was always with God in the first place, right? So as I circle through, as many of us circle through, that's where we're going to come back to. Because as we're talking about systemic racism and systemic problems, all of these are points that get to a central place of change. And it's going to be a multi-directional, multi-pronged solution set that we're going to need when we get to that conversation that Dr. Neighbor-Stevens is referring to. But being clear-headed and of a clear mind is part of that process.
Thank
So
you.
look forward to that discussion. I'll be ready then.
Good. Dr. Wilkes, you go. I'm going to take the last comment.
Okay. I think what we do, I have one word: cross-pollinate. We need to be in additional places. You all know I served 5 years on the Maryland State Board of Education. Dr. Lawson and I are very much involved with community work, with groups that include pastors, with groups that include educators. I think that we need to not let any borders, any titles get in the way of us getting out into our community. I think we need to vote. Anybody who is not voting, I think we need to talk with them, him or her. And I just think that we need to be in all the places we can be, saying the truth about just how diverse we are, just how beautiful we are, just how wonderful we are, and how much we contribute. We contribute a lot to these United States of America and around the world, and we need to celebrate that. So cross-pollinate, get out of our offices to the extent we can, get into the community to the extent we can, meet people who have other gifts that we can put together with our gifts. And thank everyone so much, Dr. Lawson, Dr. Bailey, everyone who participated today, even those who participated by listening and feeling what we all felt today. It's a tough day. It's a tough day. Thank you, Dr. Maxey.
Thank you, Dr. Waltz. And my final comment is, back a few Sundays ago, we had a title called Knowledge is Power. I want to change that. Knowledge is power, but wealth plus knowledge is really power. And I think the equation of power in this European type country and capitalism, you can be as knowledgeable as you want, but if you don't have the leverage of wealth, you don't have very much power. So I think we ought to add wealth to that contingency. Thank everybody for joining us today. We'll be back next week. What's our program, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens?
Next Sunday, we will have Dr. Johnson, who will be discussing her book with us.
Okay, and then the following Sunday?
The following Sunday, we're going to talk about busting. The following Sunday is Super Bowl Sunday. We're going to have a conversation led by Dr. Hines discussing how to handle medical emergencies in our homes or at our places of work. When people experience certain things, what is the best thing to do? Just some practical conversation. And we may actually, because she and I discussed the fact that we will be in the February, not that we restrict Black History to February, but we will probably get back into some of the conversation of today on that meeting.
She's not going to be talking during the Super Bowl, though. We're going to finish
The
up before
meeting
that.
is-
We're going to be very cognizant of your time. Not that we didn't manage to do that today, but we're going to be very cognizant of your time on that day.
I'm going to watch the Super Bowl team that pays me the most money. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.